Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly, with a podcast extra, a follow-up of sorts to what's been going on with the economy and tariffs over the last little while. And some economists right now are looking at some of the numbers over the last couple of months and saying, hey, maybe this Trump tariff thing was all blown out of proportion. Maybe it's not so bad after all for the U.S. economy, even for the Canadian economy. Well, that kind of sentiment and mindset, I think, deserves a closer look. So let's peel back a little bit and look at some of the numbers here and maybe why some of those numbers exist. And I'll reference a piece that was posted by Peter Armstrong, the very capable economics reporter for the CBC. It's on the cbc.ca webpage, and it's entitled, "The U.S. economy is thriving in spite of tariffs. Will it last?" My guess is, based on some of the information I have seen and others have seen, is no, it won't last. There's a bit of a false sense of security here that's come into play in the U.S. economy, and even to a certain extent up here in Canada, too, since the tariffs came on. Let's face it, when Trump started this policy and announced that this was the way that things were going to be, scared the hell out of an awful lot of people, not just here in Canada, but right around the world, and set a number of countries scrambling to try to find deals. And we talked about that on previous podcasts, the agreements that they're signing with the EU and the UK and Japan are not good deals for those countries. They're basically to try to get Trump to back off just a little bit. But the numbers as of today tell a story, but I'm not so sure that it's really something that you can hang your hat on. They say that, look, the economy's doing pretty well, all things considered, by just about every indicator that the economists are looking at right now. The U.S. economy is holding up remarkably well, driving prices up, dramatically reducing global trade. Those were all the things that we thought were going to be happening. There was doom and gloom, and they say a lot of that stuff just hasn't happened. But if you drill down, and I think Peter Thompson talked about this in his piece, and I've talked to and read other economists' perspectives on this as well, there's a reason why it hasn't happened. And I think the key word here is it hasn't happened yet. And the reason for that, among others, is when Trump made this announcement, of course, he said, well, this is going to happen in 60-odd days. I forget what the timeline was because he's changed it so many different times. But what happened then is the suppliers, the manufacturers in other countries, not just here in Canada, but in other parts of the world, scrambled at that point to basically ramp up production and get their product over to the United States before these tariffs went into effect. And they were successful to a certain degree of getting all their stuff in there. So to that end, what has happened is an awful lot of factories and a lot of warehouses there are jam full of product that the American consumers can still purchase, and they're not going to be impacted by the tariffs because the tariffs were not in place by then. So, and including by that is the automobile industry that started ramping up production because they were concerned about what was happening. But it's not really a true indicator of what's going on. It's basically the material that's stored there right now, the warehousing that's going on right now, is creating and giving, I think, consumers a false sense of security that, oh, this isn't going to have an impact on prices at all. Well, eventually, that stockpile is going to run out. And the people that want to buy washing machines or electronics or whatever the case might be are going to get nailed because the stuff that's going to come in after the tariffs have gone into effect is going to cost an awful lot more. It just hasn't happened yet. So let's not kid ourselves that, hey, everything's going to be okay and that the U.S. economy is that resilient. It's going to have an impact. The other element that the number of economists have pointed out here, too, is it is having a negative impact on an awful lot of businesses in the States, but they seem to be afraid to pass those losses on to consumers at this stage because they're afraid they're going to piss off Donald Trump, and who knows what Trump may do to them. Case in point is General Motors, who in the last quarter, we're told, lost over $1 billion. $1 billion. That's a big number, even for General Motors. But they have not done anything about that. They have not passed those losses on to the consumers now because they figured, well, you know what? Trump's going to get mad at us because that's going to make him look bad, and God knows what he'll do to us then. And apparently other companies are doing the same sort of thing. So they simply say, we'll suck it up, we'll take the beating, and we'll have to pay that ourselves, and we don't want to pass that on because we don't want to lose any consumers. But that can't last forever either. I mean, at some point, General Motors and these other companies have got to say, look, We either go out of business or we start passing this on to the consumer in the way of higher prices. It's going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet. And I think we have to understand that there seems to be this false sense of security that's going on, and even to a certain extent here in Canada. Because the economic numbers in this country, so far anyway, in the last couple of months, are still looking pretty good. Employment is actually up. That's concerning. Consumer spending that we were concerned about apparently has gone up. Now, that's a number. So let's also quantify that too. Consumer spending is up in this country, but is it with U.S. goods, or is it with imported goods, or is it with us buying Canadian goods? We don't know that yet. They don't actually break it down to that extent. So, yeah, we seem to be more confident in our Canadian economy right now, but are we doing that specifically to try to prop up the buy Canadian element of what's going on, and buy Canadian of what's manufactured here in Canada, whether it's produce, whether it's any other kind of manufacturing element that's going on? So the numbers tell you a story, but they don't tell you the story behind the story. We have to be very careful of that when we start looking at these headlines and trying to ascertain just what kind of an impact these are going to have and what Trump's policies are going to have. And as we've talked about in previous podcasts, the big black cloud on the horizon now is August 1st, because that's when Trump says there will be more tariffs toward Canada, toward other countries as well, which is why the European Union and others are jumping right now to try to find some sort of a deal. And as we mentioned in a previous podcast, it's utterly ridiculous. Even the French president says that the EU deal was a capitulation to Donald Trump, and that's not what you do when you're trying to get the best interests of your country in place for the long term here when it looks at economic policy. So people are, I guess, when they're desperate, they do desperate things, but they don't necessarily think of the long-term impact of what's going to be happening. Now, we in Canada so far seem to be cognizant of that. I'm glad. Hey, I'm a taxpayer too. I'm glad that the economic picture is not as gloomy as some people have predicted that it was going to be. That's a good story. That's great. But it can't last, because the tariffs are going to continue. God knows what kind of tariffs he's going to try to impose on us. And no matter what numbers we may look at that said the Canadian economy is doing a little better than we thought it was going to be, we do know the reality is here on the street where you and I live on a daily basis, our neighbors and the people that we see in our communities, we know that the auto industry has been hard hit, and there are job losses there. I mean, yeah, I got more than a little ticked off as I was watching the Blue Jays playing in Detroit this past weekend. All the Canadians, and they referenced this a dozen times during the broadcasts. They're coming across the border there to watch the game. Do they realize the fact that they or their neighbors are losing jobs at the GM plants, at the auto plants down in Windsor? That the Trump policies and the American policies are having a negative impact. We have to put this in place and understand that, look, there is going to be an impact. We just can't whistle past the graveyard here and pretend everything's going to be fine, because it's not. And we need our government to be cognizant of the long-term impact. And it looks as if, so far anyway, that that's what they're doing. Now, as we've talked about over the last couple of podcasts, we don't know as of now whether there's going to be any kind of a deal that's going to be struck. I got the sense from what Prime Minister Carney has talked about over the last little while that they're not going to sign a deal just for the sake of signing a deal. And that's good. I'm glad. But that doesn't mean there isn't going to be an awful lot of blood, sweat, and tears on this side of the border after this economy has to absorb, I guess, what Trump is going to do on August the 1st. And not just to Canada. It's going to have an impact on other countries as well. But we're concerned, obviously, about our own backyard and our own economic situation here. So we will watch this. We will monitor this. But I guess the cautionary tale here is be careful of headlines, because they can be misleading. There's still an awful lot of concern, and legitimate concern, about what could be happening here right now. And it hasn't shown its ugly head yet, but it certainly seems as if we're heading in that direction. And that's why we're really counting on the government to do what's best for Canada, not what's best for Donald Trump's ego. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. Of course, wherever you get your podcasts, whichever platform, on Spotify, Apple, Blue Sky, we always include background information, too, when we post these for your edification, to try to put a little context to some of the things that we're talking about right now. And we ask you to read those, and also to continue with the feedback. We love getting the feedback from you, pro or con, or your opinions on some of these hot topics, because they're going to have an impact on all of us on a daily basis. So keep that coming, too. We'd love to see that. Thanks to Madeline Kelly, as always, for the great work putting this one together. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.